time for us to get started with our class. I really enjoyed all the visiting, though. It's nice to have a full building with everybody talking to one another. Today we're going to be looking at Daniel chapter 2. So if you'll turn with me there, we'll be primarily there this morning, and we'll be taking a look at Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar, and we'll try to see if we can figure out this dream as well. Before we get started this morning, I've asked Ethan if he'd say a prayer for us. So Ethan, if you would.
Our God, we're so thankful to be your children. We're honored and we feel so special that you love us so much, that we get to enjoy your blessings every day. Thank you for this time that we have to study your holy word, the words that your Spirit has for us. Our prayer is that it's written on our hearts and that it changes who we are. Thank you for Tristan leading us. We know that you're working through him, and we're excited to participate and engage with your word right now. So in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Okay, so like I said, we're in Daniel chapter 2. So just to give a quick recap of what we talked about, Daniel chapter 1, we looked at kind of the history. Daniel chapter 1, we could say, is kind of an introduction to the book and sets up the scene for us as different parts that we're going to read about. Starts in the time period of when Nebuchadnezzar first comes into power in Babylon. We talked about Daniel being taken, and some of his friends, some of the younger men who are good looking, were taken back to Babylon to serve and learn and become students, and also become hopefully court servants in the court for the king one day. And so they were prepared in that way. And we talked about also how Daniel and his friends had decided on that first day they were there, on their first challenge, that they were going to follow God's ways. And so that's just a quick recap of what's going on in Daniel chapter 1, and now we're going to hop into Daniel chapter 2. So, to start off with, I want to start off with just giving a little bit of context first. So, start off with this book here. You might see in your footnotes, as you kind of move into Daniel chapter 2, there's a note that might say, written in Aramaic. And it's kind of interesting because there's evidence there that in the Dead Sea Scrolls that we have actually a whole section of this book that is written in Aramaic. I think that is something that we can look to for credibility and authenticity in this book. If you think about it, we have Daniel, who is in Babylon where they speak this language, and he is writing in Aramaic. And also, there's a part that's written in Hebrew, and that talks back to when he was also most likely when he learned from his upbringing. Some people suggest that this might have been all in Aramaic and some of it translated for purposes. But other than that, that's kind of the reason why you might have that footnote in Aramaic there. Let's talk about the timeline now. So we're going to start off with talking about Nebuchadnezzar. So as I said earlier, he starts reigning in 605 BC approximately. And this happens after Nabopolassar, which is his father, dies, and Nebuchadnezzar is sent to the throne there. And during that time, we also see Daniel is taken into captivity, and others along with him, to Babylon. And it's also during this time that we know that Jehoiakim is king. And we know that from the first chapter of the first verse, and it's the third year there. So something I want to show us this morning is, I think it'll help us understand as we go into chapter 2, kind of the timeline. If you are carefully reading your Bibles, you might notice that in the first chapter, their training starts when they're taken into captivity and extends for 3 years. And it's at that point, at the end of the 3 years, that they're brought before the king and recognized. And in the beginning of chapter 2, in verse 1, it says that Daniel is doing all this stuff in chapter 2 in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. So there's a little bit of a timeline difference there. So I want to take a moment to explain or give a possible resolution as to why that might be. And so I'm going to start off with talking about Jeremiah. So if you want to turn to Jeremiah chapter 25, and we'll be back in Daniel in just a second. But in Jeremiah chapter 25, you'll see kind of another one of these alleged discrepancies. So Jeremiah chapter 25, starting in verse 1, says, "The word came to Jeremiah concerning all the people of Judah in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah. This was the 1st year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon. So, we got two different phrases here. We have chapter 1 telling us that the beginning was in the 3rd year of Jehoiakim, and then we have Jeremiah chapter 5 here telling it was the 4th year of Jehoiakim that Nebuchadnezzar began his reign. And so, who's right? Well, one possible solution, there's a couple of explanations here, so I'm going to give you the one that many commentators kind of lean on and agree on, but this is not the only explanation there is. I just want to preface with that. But the one that lots of commentators, and maybe your study Bible might have a footnote about, is that there's a couple of different methods at dating between the Babylonians and the Jewish nation. So the easiest way for me to explain this is if I use an example. So Babylonians use something called ascension year dating, which is when the new year of when a king dies, that is still their year. And then the new year, when the new king goes into power, begins the 1st year of the new king's years of reign. Jewish method would be the start date is when they come into power. So if the king dies in that year and a new king comes into power, that's their 1st year. And then the next year would be the 2nd year. So to kind of give you an example, if we elected our president today, we would say that using Babylonian ascension dating, that just like we do today, actually, when we elect the president in November, he's not the president. His 1st year president doesn't start until the next year in January, right? And so if we were to use the Jewish dating system, we would say when the president is elected in November, the 1st year of the next presidency starts in November as well, and the 2nd year would be in the next year. So does that make sense? Okay, kind of stumbling over my words there, but that's kind of how that works there. And so if we look at back at Jeremiah and Daniel, we'll notice that Daniel is probably Babylonian. He's probably using Babylonian dating system there. And Jeremiah might be using the Jewish dating system there. And so you'll see that year difference there. It kind of makes sense when you use those two different dating systems, and they would line up. All that to say, as we move into chapter 2, verse 1, as I said before, we have that training that happens for 3 years at the start. So it would be like the 3rd year when Nebuchadnezzar's reign would be when Daniel comes and would be interpreting for him. If we go by chapter 1, but chapter 2 says it happens in the 2nd year. So we go that same logic. Daniel in chapter 1 is taken into captivity when Nebuchadnezzar's father dies. And so by Babylonian records, that would mean that is the ascension year. That's the 1st year of their training, but it's not the 1st year of the new king's year yet. And the 2nd year of training would be in the 1st year of King Nebuchadnezzar's reign. And then the 3rd year of training would be in the 2nd year of Nebuchadnezzar's training. So if that gave you any trouble, then hopefully that will satisfy that curiosity there. I totally dove into this for more time than I probably should have, and I probably could have talked about this for the whole class period because it's super interesting to me. But that is the method of dating that is most commonly accepted among commentators on how to resolve that time discrepancy there. And I think it just makes sense also. It gives a lot of credibility to the Bible. These are two different cultures that are with two different styles of writing, and so if they lined up, it might be a way that you could say, well, Babylonian dating is different than Jewish dating, and these don't line up. It should be in your head. So I think it just culturally makes sense and gives credibility there as well. Any comments or questions about that before I move on to the actual content of Daniel? Awesome. Let's talk about Daniel then. So we're going to start off Daniel chapter 2, verses 1 through 13. We're going to take a look at Nebuchadnezzar and his friends, or his court, if you will. And so I'm going to ask from you in just a second. You can take this time to scan over the first 13 verses if you need to. But I'm going to ask you in just a moment to kind of talk about the character of first the court around the king, and then second the character of Nebuchadnezzar himself, the characteristics he shows in this chapter. But before that, I want to kind of set the scene for you. So Nebuchadnezzar in the first couple verses has this dream, and it troubles him. And his court is then summoned to resolve this dream. And this is not an uncommon thing for kings to ask of their people, their religious court around them. They have these dreams all the time back during those times, and they would ask for interpretations. And a lot of times, there are these people they would call God kings, and so they are seen as people who are kings on the earth, who are godlike, have godlike characteristics according to their religious practices. And so these dreams would be seen as a way that they could communicate between themselves here on earth and the gods in the heavens. And so we have examples of this kind of communication through dreams, even in the Bible itself. You can think of Jacob in a dream about the ladder in Genesis, and Joseph's dream about his rise to power and relationship with his brothers in Genesis chapter 37 as well. And then even in Solomon, when God is asking what he wants, he comes to him in a dream in 1 Kings chapter 3. And so it's not far-fetched that in this culture, these kings are getting these dreams and say, oh, this must mean something, you know? And so that's when he summons his court. And the men that are summoned here, we kind of hit on this earlier when we talked about Daniel in chapter 1. They're trained with some of the most advanced studies that they have during the time. They have practice in language, the arts, they are practicing in culture. These are very educated men. And they also most likely have a pretty high degree of charisma to be able to work in the king's court. And they also want to please the king at the same time. They're not just saying what needs to be said, but they're also trying to make this balance of, I want to please the king, but I also want to give him something that is probably valid. And so we see that he summons these people to the court, and there is a critical part of the system that these men had developed that allowed them to fulfill the king's requests. And we see that in verse 4 of Daniel chapter 2. Take a look there. It says, "And the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, saying, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will give the interpretation." They need to know the dream first before they can interpret. Historians describe these parts of the men's job as follows, quote, "The interpretation of royal dreams was an art in which they were skilled. They even had manuals that listed various symbols that appeared in dreams along with their probable meaning." And so these men are expecting to know the dream, and then they're going to go in the book or their manuals, find the different symbolism that they saw in the dream, and make some kind of interpretation for the king there. But it all kind of hinges on the fact that the dream is told to them in the first place. So, with that kind of setting there, I want to talk about the men themselves, the wise men, the Chaldeans. So, what characteristics do you see with these men? They're con artists. Okay, yes. So we see in verse 9 of Daniel chapter 2, when the king is talking back to the men as they're kind of pleading for this dream, says, "If you do not make known the dreams to me, there is only one decree for you have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me until the time has changed." And so, yeah, apparently the king is even aware that these guys are sweet-talking him all the time, and they are making up these interpretations just to please the king a lot of times. What else do we see with these Chaldean men?
In verse 10, they actually understand, whether they're being honest about it, they understand that what's being asked of them is impossible. Like only a God or God would actually tell the dream and the interpretation. So
Right.
they're limited somehow.
Yes, exactly. They are limited. The key phrase there in verse 11, I would even say, is they say this, quote, "It is a difficult thing that the king requests, and there is no other who can tell it to the king except the gods whose dwelling is not with flesh." And so these men are kind of perfectly setting up Daniel to come in here and rock the king's world and theirs as well. It says, "Whose dwelling is not among mere mortals." Their gods apparently don't work with them directly. And so this is going to be a key thing as we look further into Daniel this morning. Another thing that we see here, oh, go ahead.
These people were very respected people in this culture. Like, they were the people that everybody would go to for everything.
Right.
Because they have talents and gifts that other people just don't have. So for them to reach such a low point of this is impossible means that their pride is being broken and they're not receiving the same respect. So it's also showing how Nebuchadnezzar is really freaked out over this.
Yes.
And he's like in this desperate state where he would call the most respected people in the nation and then not give them the respect that they would usually get.
Right. Yeah. So
Ali said that these men were super respected in this culture, which is true. And this is kind of a point where Nebuchadnezzar would go in times where he needs advice. And when they don't provide the answer, then yeah, it's a little bit scary for him. Go ahead, Kevin.
And it seems like they sort of have a code among themselves that we're all going to play by the same rules. As the story unfolds, they get mad, at Daniel. They got to get rid of him,
right.
Because he's making them look bad.
Right. Yeah.
So they were definitely getting showed up a little bit, but they seem to have, yeah, like you said, some kind of communication or respect among each other that they all kind of abide by. Right. Awesome. And another thing we see in verse 4 is they use that sweet talk, may the king live forever. They're smart men, as we've already stated. They know what to say. They're charismatic. They're going to get the king's attention, and they're going to be able to hold it. And so all that together, yeah, that's kind of the men that we're dealing with here, that Daniel is among. And let's kind of shift focus now. Let's talk about Nebuchadnezzar. So as we look at Nebuchadnezzar and his responses to these men, what do we see in his character? A little maniac. Yeah, he's getting nervous there, I would say, definitely. Go ahead.
Well, it's interesting to me because it seems like he knows that most of the things they say aren't really valid.
Right.
And this time he's actually holding it to them. But previous times, I guess he's just okay with letting them sweet talk him.
Right.
But this time he's holding them to a standard that they can't reach.
It seems like this dream here hit a new level for him where he needs an answer, and he wants to know that the answer is the truth. He's looking for a truth in that answer. Yeah, definitely. Go ahead.
I think the dream scared him.
Yes.
And kind of spooked him into not just accepting the normal, everyday, he's lost confidence in himself and the people who advise him. So that's, I take it to mean that that's what drove him to do it this way.
Right.
Yeah, so you definitely might have been scared in there and maybe have drove the direction that he's going into. What else do we see? How about his hold over the nation? What do we see there? This man, Nebuchadnezzar, he can take all the most respected men in the nation, and just his word can have them all removed from the nation and destroyed, essentially. Very powerful man. Seems like what he says goes here. And so, not only that, but he's ruthless as well. If they're not able to interpret this dream, he's going to get rid of these people. He doesn't want to be sweet-talked anymore. And so, if you can't follow the king's orders here, then you are subject to the wrath of the king, it seems, as well.
When he issues a decree and he signs off on the decree, it cannot be changed.
Yeah, it cannot be changed. Right.
So once the king has said it, and it seems to have that surety through, as we look at Nebuchadnezzar, he has that surety in his words a lot of time. And so kind of shows that as the dream comes, it seems like the rest of what's going on in the realm stops, and he's asking for all the men to come together so that a dream interpretation can be given. Go ahead.
I completely agree about his hold and his power, but I don't think he knows where that power came from.
Right. Yes.
He might be ignorant of where the power came from, and we'll see in just a moment. Daniel informs him exactly where that power came from. And so we have this kind of self-centered king here who's ruthless. He's smart and cunning as well, I would say. He knows when he's being sweet-talked, and he's powerful. So all of this leads into a king who is basically, if you're in the king's court, this is a very extremely dangerous position. the king gets to a point where he doesn't really like what you're saying anymore, and you're gone. And so we have that setting in mind. We're at a point where we are kind of completely set up for God's work here. We have this dangerous situation where the king is asking for something impossible from the men in his court, and the men here are admitting defeat. And now we're going to turn to Daniel. So let's talk about Daniel. Go ahead.
Another thought. Just, I mean, if you're this ruler of an empire, I would imagine you have to be a little bit paranoid or afraid somebody's going to take you down. So we're going to learn that the dream is about this statue that gets destroyed.
Right.
Right? And so perhaps he's feeling, so he definitely has a sense that he believes in a higher power.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And he's attributing it to the wrong things. But also, perhaps he's thinking, if I share that I'm having this dream that is an omen that my nation's about to be destroyed, and he probably is hesitant to even tell the dream because that could reflect weakness, and so perhaps that's why he's wanting to kill them all.
Right.
It's a very dangerous situation.
Very dangerous, yeah.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Well said. Yeah.
Verse 5, where in verse 4 it starts, the Chaldeans tell us the dream, and then we'll tell you the interpretation. But then in verse 5 there, the king said, "Thing is gone from me." Mm-hmm. So you're thinking maybe that he can't tell them what the dream was because it's gone. He says it's gone from me. In other words, I can't tell you, but I'm still bothered. He is still tortured with this dream. Something's torturing him, but he don't know what it is.
Yeah, this dream is
In some kind of trouble in some sense, right?
No, he wants that to come back. He wants to know what's troubling him.
right. Yeah.
So he said, and they don't know what it is. They don't even remember the dream.
Yeah.
Verse right there.
Yeah.
So if someone comes to him and tells him what has gone from his mind, what he dreamed, exactly what he dreamed, then he'll know that that's a truth.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
so
he's definitely looking for something there, and again, like dangerous situation, right? Awesome. All right, let's move into talking about Daniel. So, next couple of verses, I'm just going to read. Sorry, do you have something?
Yeah, I was going to read something about Daniel.
Sure.
So, what I really like at verse 16, I might be skipping ahead here.
No, you're good.
But I think it's so cool that Daniel has already appointed a appointment with the king before he's even prayed to God, asking for him to reveal him the dream.
Yeah.
I think that takes a lot of faith, because not only is Daniel having faith to, take a big step here, but he's assuming that God's actually going to grant him this. And I think the reason why he's willing to make that assumption is because he knows he's doing God's will.
Yeah. Awesome. And
You are one step ahead of me because I was about to ask. I'm going to read these next couple verses for you, and I'm basically going to ask for answers like that. I want you to take a look at Daniel's character here, and this is going to hit on one of the points we want to make. How can we learn from Daniel's life? I think these 9 verses that we have here are just a perfect example of like the many things we can learn about being a servant for God. And so as I read these, I'm going to have a kind of a twofold question. Point out the characteristic that you see, and then go ahead and make an application as well, if you don't mind, of how we can learn from that as well. So I'm going to read starting in verse 14, and we'll go through 23. In the counsel and wisdom, then with counsel and wisdom, Daniel answered Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, "Why is the decree from the king so urgent?" And Arioch made the decision known to Daniel. So Daniel went in and asked the king to give him time, that he might tell the king the interpretation. And Daniel went to his house. He made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions, that they might seek mercies from the God of heaven concerning the secret, so that Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. So Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, "Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings, raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and secret things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we asked of you. For you have made known to us the King, the man. Awesome. So, what do we see here as we read about Daniel? Go ahead, Allie.
Before the section of verses in verse 12 and 13, the decree is to kill and destroy all of your wise men. So Daniel is in this box, the same box as the Chaldeans in the Egyptians. And in way back in the day, ancient Israel times, they did not categorize the book of Daniel as a book of the prophets, or Daniel as a prophet. So it's just really interesting to me that he's categorized in the same box as the magicians, but he attributes all of his power to the God, Yahweh. But he's never called a prophet of Yahweh. So that's super interesting. And also in verse 14, he's face to face with this man who's come to kill him.
Right, yeah.
And he says, just give me time. So this could have been interpreted as he's just trying to escape death.
Yes.
But then he comes back with power and with the power of Yahweh on his side.
Right.
It's amazing.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And
Kind of build on that. Like, I like what it says at the beginning of verse 14. It says, then with counsel and wisdom, might have variation of words there, but he speaks with poise, and he is cool-headed when he's approached by this gentleman who's coming to kill him. And so, as we look at those characteristics, when we're in dire circumstances, maybe losing your car, or you are let go from a job, or you're wronged in some way, how do you respond to those situations that come in front of you? And there's a good example here of using cool-headedness and poise as those situations come. And then, like you said, this gentleman here is coming to kill them, but we know from Daniel chapter 1 that God had given him favor with some of the chief officials already, and so we might be seeing a little bit of God working here as well, and see that the way that Daniel has conducted himself has allowed him to have some of that favor with some of the officials here to give him the respect and time he needs. Go ahead, Josh.
I think it's pretty cool. We mentioned this earlier, but in verse 11, when the wise men say, "No one can know this except the God whose dwelling is not with mortals," and then that just contrasted to how God does well with his people.
Right.
And so for Daniel, it's wisdom and power belong to God, and then in verse 20, but then in verse 23, you have given me wisdom and power. And so God is working with his people and dwelling with them. And then that just makes me think of more of our application in Colossians, where Paul is talking about another mystery and how God has made the glorious wealth of this mystery, which is Christ in us, the hope of glory. And so, for us, another glorious mystery is working with Christ and Christ in us. And then Paul talks about how he's laboring, striving with Christ's strength that works powerfully in him. So I think that's pretty cool, just how without God, it's just like this super far away, the gods or whatever, that doesn't dwell with us, but our God, he does work with us.
Yeah.
He gives us part of his character.
amazing.
Well said, Josh. Awesome. Go ahead.
This is not an ideal situation for Daniel at all, like this position right now, but also just being in Babylon. But what I take from Daniel is that he's like habitually bringing God with him everywhere he goes.
Yes.
And like from the beginning, like he wasn't like just like waiting, plotting in his bedroom, wherever he was, like to like hear this news that he's gonna get killed. He's like, wait just a second, I've been like waiting my whole life for this. But he was like, by the way he lived his life, though, he kind of was in a way, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because he was like, I'm not going to defile myself. I'm going to be loyal to God and him alone. And he really sets himself apart because of that, obviously. And God is with him, like we've been mentioning here. But I really like that. His head, like because he has been like habitually with God and bringing him with them, he's able to be like level-headed and he's able to have like this discernment and be like, okay, well, slow down, and we have some time to figure this out. So that's what I really appreciate about Daniel.
Yeah, and
For application-wise, We talked about this last class. Like, are you going to decide to be with God before that time comes, whenever you're going to be tested? And we see here, Daniel has decided, and he's trusting in God, and he knows what his vindication is going to be. So, awesome. Thank you. Anything else that we see here? Go ahead, Allie.
Awesome. Good to everybody.
The other thing that I saw was how he goes and he asks his friends to pray on his behalf so God can reveal mystery to him. And I just think that's really powerful to show the influence of faithful people praying on your behalf and the power of prayer.
Amazing. Yeah, and
Two sides to that. Are you going to have your friends to lean on? That's one side. Who are you surrounding yourself with? And then the other side of that is, are you able to be that friend to be leaned on and depended on for spiritual needs? Who in your life are you that rock for? Awesome.
First thing he does, he goes back to his people and he's like, I need you guys to support me.
yeah, and if we recall, he didn't
Have anything? Nothing. There's no temple for him to go to. No priest for him to consult. He's probably missing some of the sacrifices as well. Kind of the last remnants of his time in Israel, or in Judah and Israel, is with just the people that are surrounded with him. Go ahead.
We see a lot of Daniel's faith coming through as he goes to the king and asks for time to learn that interpretation. So now he's really on the spot.
Yeah.
But that, you've got to have a lot of faith to go to the king and ask for that time.
I'd say.
Obviously, as we learn through this, and he looked back at his companions, and all together they're able to. God reveals the interpretation, not only the dream but the interpretation.
Yeah.
I mean, that takes a lot of courage when you
does.
think about it.
Yeah.
I think some of that boldness goes back to what Lucas was saying, that that confidence can come along with knowing that we're working toward the will of God and being aligned with His will at that point. Adam, that's your hand.
Just putting a couple of those things together that people said. We see the faith he has. Now, he's not that level-headedness, but then also asks his friends to pray.
Yeah.
So, you might think, well, he's got this figured out. He's not worried. What's the need for prayer? Or at least other people praying. But I think that we showed here that there is always a reason.
Amazing. Yes.
And humbling too. Not putting faith in himself, but knows that he can be confident because he is confident in God. It's amazing. Awesome. Any other thoughts that we have here? I think we've summed it up pretty good. I also just, as we move into this next section here, when Daniel's going to be interacting with Nebuchadnezzar, just notice how smart he is in the way he approaches it, and humble at the same time. He gives credit to the king. He calls him King of Kings at one point. You're ruler over everything. He's presenting himself in a very intelligent manner, I would say, as well as giving glory to the God that he serves, God himself. Awesome. So, just real quick on the prayer there. We could talk about that for a while. I'm just going to hit on a couple of things here. 3 things that he highlights here. God is in power. Wisdom belongs to the Lord, and God gives wisdom to those who have understanding. Those are a couple of points that are really prevalent in that prayer, and something that we can look to replicate in our prayer life, as well as recognizing those facts. Okay. So in verses 24 through 30, we finally see Daniel confront Nebuchadnezzar. And I like how Daniel frames his interpretation that he's going to bring. He says, basically, your wise men and your magicians can't do this. So he's making a distinction between what the men are able to do and what God is able to do. But he also says there is a God in heaven who has revealed to you the secrets. God has given you a direct vision of things that are going to come to pass. And so we see here God has already written history before it's happening, showing not only his greatness, but impressiveness and his wisdom and his foresight. And so this is, as we've mentioned already, this is a direct contradiction to what the magicians had said earlier. There's not a God who dwells in flesh among men, who works with men. And then another part of that framing is he humbles himself. He says, I am not someone who is more wise than all, not greater than all. This is the work of God that has been revealed to me. Something really interesting here is if you take a look at the way in chapter 2 Daniel is put into the situation, it's a pretty interesting study to look at Joseph as well. They're pretty parallel in their situations in life. Both kind of put into a foreign nation. They both have an opportunity to serve God with one of the highest power in the nation. They take those opportunity and they're placed in a place of power as well. So interesting study there. But in Genesis chapter 41, Joseph kind of gives a similar message to Pharaoh. So Joseph answered Pharaoh saying, it is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. And so they both have that confidence and humbleness to say that this is God's work, not mine. And so with that, Daniel's about to do the impossible with a God who does dwell among men. And so for the rest of our time, I just want to get into that dream. So let's see if we can figure out the dream. I'm going to try drawing on the board. That might be a grave decision, as nobody will understand what's going on the board, but we'll try it. So talk to me about this dream. This is verses 31 through 45. What do we got?
Head of gold. Okay. Head. Gold. All right. What else do we got?
Chest and arms are silver.
Chest and arms silver. All right. Here we go. Silver. All right. Let's keep going down.
It is the bronze.
Yeah, they'll make it thighs or bronze. This is getting hard to delineate. All right, so we'll say wearing shorts. All right, and then what do we got from there? Legs. Yeah, so we got the legs. These are iron. These are legs. Yeah, I don't know if these are the right decision. And then, last but not least, we have the feet that are a mixture of iron and clay. All right. Okay. Talk to me, before we even talk about all these different parts of the image, before, in verse 31,
Talk to me about the image itself. Terrifying. Okay. What else do we see? Right. Okay. We see anything else? Mighty.
okay. So, we have a couple of different.
Some versions might say terrifying, some might say awesome, kind of in the same vein, something that would scare somebody. So we get now the idea that this dream did, in fact, probably scare him because this thing that was brought before him was terrifying. It was strong, it was big, and it was described as extraordinary or dazzling. All right, and so the symbolism here, I would suggest to you, are all pieces of the same image. So all these pieces kind of are of the same thing, is what I would suggest to you. And I'll explain a little bit more here. So these giant statues, back in the day, when somebody wanted themselves to be remembered, they make a huge statue of themselves that hopefully would not be lost to time, made of like stone or some kind of metal, hopefully so that they will be remembered in time. And so we have this giant statue here that is displaying greatness or image, and it's going to eventually be destroyed. And it's going to be destroyed by something that is not part of this image. And so if we move on from the image, what else do we have in the picture?
Stone being
Stone.
without hands.
Stone and without hands. Right? They were cut without hands, I think is the phrase that it uses there. So here's a stone. Okay.
not part of this image, cut without hands. So we'll talk about that for a minute, that phrase there. So the stone here is, according to Hebrew records, is a stone that's used for building of some sort. And that's not a stone that you go on the side of the road and pick up and put in your building. This is a stone that you have to fashion yourself, make into a shape, and then put as a building block into the structure. And so we have a stone cut without hands. And so this is an implication here that this stone is supernatural. This is a stone that is ready to be built with, but was never fashioned by any man to be built with. Okay? What else do we have? There at the end.
Crushes the statue.
Okay, so stone's going to first crush the feet, and then it's going to crush the statue. And what happens after that?
It's a great mountain.
Blown away.
And then we have the Great Mountain. I don't even know how to draw that.
Okay. Awesome. So here's our image. Got a statue. Has different parts. We have a stone, probably not made by man. Statue, made by man. Stone's going to come, destroy the feet, destroy the body, and after that, we have this big mountain that covers the whole earth. Awesome. Go ahead.
I want to point out something interesting about this stone not made by hands. The same phrasing of supernatural stones is used in 1 Kings 6 whenever Solomon is building the temple with stones that are not cut or made with tools or by hands. Same idea. It's like this is God's stone.
Right.
So it's kind of alluding back to the idea of the temple.
Right.
Still my message. So, well, good on you. You can always count on Kelly to do that for me. All right. So yeah, Solomon, you perfectly said. I don't think I need to re-explain that, but similar phraseology is used elsewhere in the Bible to describe the supernatural stone, which I would suggest to you is the Messiah. Okay. So let's talk about the history a little bit more. So got head of gold. We know Daniel tells us this is Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom. That would be Babylon. Does anybody do a little bit of research on what the other ones might line up to? You know, at the end here, this is probably when the Messiah comes, and so we can kind of infer here that that would be Rome. What about these middle two sections?
What was that? Syrian Persian, yeah. A lot of people call it Medo-Persian. This is getting complicated. And then the bronze, typically historians will say that's Greece, or a Greek empire.
Grecian Empire, excuse me. Awesome. So, got this head of gold, and when Daniel talks about it to the king, he says, King of Kings is the phrase he uses here to describe him. He's made him ruler over all of the things, but the interesting part is that we're told that this kingdom was given to him by God. And so this would be a very humbling realization for Nebuchadnezzar himself, being the one that is a king and power and ruler over the powerful nation over the earth. And so Daniel first tells him that. He suggests that these things are going to come to pass. Eventually, your kingdom is great. It's going to give way to an inferior empire and another one, and will end up in Rome, which is when there's going to be this strong, powerful nation that will take over the world. And then we'll enter this period of where there's kind of a divided kingdom, where there is a strong force, which I would suggest to you is the Roman Empire, and the small governments or nations that they may have taken over, being the Jewish nation, would be a part of that. So they're kind of intermingled. And that's when the stone is going to come. We say specifically when the feet is there, and the stone's going to come, and it's going to destroy this, and basically establish this new kingdom. And so we see, and mismanage my time a little bit, so I'll try to speed this up. We see that the stone has the role of kind of breaking that kingdom up and establishing the new kingdom. And after that, we see the mountain coming. And after the whole image talks about being crushed and put away like chaff, dust, if you will. You remember this image here kind of represents the kingdoms of man. And now we have the supernatural stone coming and establishing a new kingdom, not man-made. And so Daniel describes this as a kingdom that will be established and prevail for eternity, and that the world will not have a hand in, that this will be owned by God. This will be his kingdom. And so I would suggest to you this is a prophecy of sorts, where we kind of are going to walk through history, end up with a new spiritual, not man-made kingdom established by God. Does that all make sense? Okay, awesome. Sorry, I kind of sped through that. We can talk about that a little bit more if we need to at the beginning of class next time. But to kind of finish up this section, we see Nebuchadnezzar responds to this. And just a quick question, how does he respond to this prophecy, this interpretation of his dream? He falls on his face. He goes on the ground and he praises God. And so we can see here that the courage of Daniel, all those characteristics we talked about, pay off. And we see some sort of belief from Nebuchadnezzar himself. And so he makes Daniel and in turn his friends, his companions, into high places in the kingdom where they are going to have more opportunities to serve God in the future. Go ahead.
Two things about the humility that Daniel had. First, I think it's just realistic, and he knew it. Mm-hmm. Second, I think we reach more humble people. We reach more people when we are humble.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Thank you. Awesome both statements there. Any other comments before I end the class off? Awesome. Thank you. We'll be looking at chapter 3 next time, and same thing. Let's take a look at the characters there and make observations there. Thank you all. And